Good morning and welcome to lecture 3 of the retention series. So last week I ended with a promise. Before you touch a single cohort chart, you have to go one step back before you have users, before you have signups, anything to measure at all. There's a decision that gets made and it shapes your retention more than anything you do afterwards. And that is picking the right idea, which is why this lecture is titled How to Get Startup Ideas and Evaluate Them. So I wanted to start with this essay by Chen. About a year ago, he wrote this essay where he summarized everything he's learned from staring at thousands of retention curves. And this essay contains a sentence that makes this whole course's premise pretty scary. This one: you cannot fix bad retention. Adding more notifications will not fix your retention curve. You cannot A/B test your way to good retention, which kind of sucks because these are all topics that we're going to learn about throughout the course. And this is even scarier for me because I committed to improving 2 of my real products in public, and both have pretty bad retention. Or I guess one has really bad retention, but regardless, if you read the whole essay, his claim is more precise right here. He says, yes, you might be able to make a marginal improvement. Let's say that your day one retention is 40% and you want it to be 50%. That's great. It's potentially workable. However, if your day one is 10%, you've probably just built something that no one really wants. The basic gist is, if you've built a product that no one wants, Chen will tell you, don't optimize, stop optimizing, and just pivot. He talks about it here. In many cases, new products are better off pivoting right away. The type of pivot that fixes retention involves a complete new redesign of the app's home screen. And I would probably say of the app. And it does not matter who you are or how much you know about retention. You cannot iterate yourself to a good product. This was Google's direct competitor to Facebook back when Facebook was growing hyper fast. Their whole thing was, it's a social network with circles. You could add people to your circles, your circle of friends, your circle of family. First, let's appreciate the firepower behind this project. This is the company that has the best retention knowledge, arguably, on the planet. They have the best data infrastructure, the deepest A/B testing culture in history. There's a famous meme where this designer left Google and he wrote this blog post. He describes this funny situation where a team at Google could not decide between 2 blues. So they decided to test 41 shades between each blue to see which one performs better. He also says, I had a recent debate over whether a border should be 3, 4, or 5 pixels wide, and I was asked to prove my case, which is hilarious, right? This has become a meme. And obviously Google had unlimited, still has, engineers, unlimited money. So yeah, if anyone is an expert in retention, it's these guys. Now, I have to be honest because this is not a perfectly clean experiment that shows that retention doesn't work. Facebook is at least as extreme as Google about retention tools and techniques. Last week, we talked about this Chamath video. I hope you watched it. Just to give you an idea, like, this is the caliber of people that Google was up against. So you could tell the story as Facebook simply out-retentioned a bigger company, which isn't all that rare, right? Last week, we also showed how Facebook also went after all these other companies that are smaller than it, and it still wasn't able to out-retention them. But anyways, even with all those caveats, the core lesson is the same. So the best retention toolkit wielded by one of the biggest companies on earth could still not manufacture desire for a product that people didn't want. The result is that in 2019, Google Plus shut down, joining the famous or infamous Google graveyard. Luckily, this lecture is all about the idea. In fact, Chen ends his essay by giving his answer to the question, how do you get to great retention? And in his words, 1, the idea really matters. 2, if you want a high retention product, you need to pick a category that is high retention already. By the way, this deserves its own aside because retention has this cool like nature versus nurture component, and nature usually wins. In fact, in the same essay, Andrew Chen says, sorry, you're never going to make a hotel booking app a daily use product. And we'll talk about natural frequency in a future lecture because I think it's fascinating and super useful. Continuing. 3, you need to pick a product category where you already use an existing product every day. Keep that in mind. You're going to build something that directly competes with that. And if you win, you will stop using the other product and use your product instead. So if I were to consolidate this list, I would say that 1, the category must already be proven. And 2, you must be a user, hopefully daily, of the product yourself. This brings me to the next section of the lecture, which is the 2 ways that founders actually find ideas, which brings us back to a program essay. This one is titled Organic Startup Ideas, which I also recommend you read. At the beginning, he says this line: there are 2 types of startup ideas. 1, those that grow organically out of your own life. And 2, those that you decide from afar are going to be necessary to some class of users other than you. In fact, a 21-year-old Mark Zuckerberg knew this. There's this cool video I recommend you watch. In December 2005, which is only 2 years into building Facebook roughly, he gave a guest lecture at Harvard's CS50. In this lecture, someone asked him how companies get started. And he said this quote: I think that one cool characteristic of a lot of the companies that end up being really successful is that they started off as someone trying to make something cool and not someone trying to make a company. And then he gives the examples that Google came out of Larry and Sergey's PhD dissertation, Yahoo came out of some Stanford guys just screwing around, eBay came out of a guy trying to build a marketplace for his girlfriend to exchange Pez dispensers. And he ends with this pretty hilarious note, which is, Amazon was a little more calculated, which, just shows that for every rule, there is a Bezos exception. And that describes the entire second path that Paul Graham talked about. In fact, I should do a diagram. Okay, I love this. I really, really love this. And you can see on the left, you have the build for yourself path. And on the right, the calculated path. And calculated can be really so when people talk about Bezos, it's because he read some statistic that the internet was growing like 2,300% a year. And he worked backward saying, wow, this is a really big wave. What should I surf it with? He wrote like, what are the product categories? And he scored them. And eventually he ended up picking books. The basic idea is that he didn't build Amazon because he was dying to have a better bookstore. And you compare that to the majority of founders. Like earlier in this lecture, someone asked Zuckerberg, where did he get the idea for Facebook? And he says that he just wanted to make something where people could type in a person's name and get information about them. And in his words, he just thought that would be cool. And again, both of these paths work. There's examples on both sides. So let's just briefly look at each. This takes us back to Paul Graham and his mega famous essay, How to Get Startup Ideas. In it, he has this interesting quote: since the most successful startups generally ride some wave bigger than themselves, keep that in mind, it could be a good trick to look for waves and ask how one could benefit from them. That is the calculated Bezos path. If the calculated path calls to you, here are a few people you might find interesting. The first person is this girl, Steph Smith. She ran Trends, which was The Hustle's paid research newsletter. She also hosted the A16Z podcast, and now she does growth at NVIDIA. But what she's truly remarkable at, in my view, is finding these weird little trends. I recommend watching her interviews on the My First Million podcast, where she will just talk about trend after trend after trend. She'll talk about something like, oh, pickleball seems to be a growing trend. It is probably going to be huge in a few years, and suddenly it is. And she was right. And she teaches all of it in this course, Internet Pipes, which I also recommend. I've obviously taken it. It's a lot of fun. It's fascinating. Fun fact, this necklace that I'm wearing is because of Steph. She mentioned in her newsletter breathing necklaces and how these were trending. And I looked them up. I thought they were really cool. So I bought one. So yeah, if you start following Steph, just make sure you're financially prepared because you're going to end up buying all these random little things, but you'll love it. The other person I found is really good at this is this guy, Noah Kagan. He's a successful founder. He was employee number 30 at Facebook. He worked at Mint, and he created AppSumo, which helps you find really cool software at discounts. He wrote this book, $1 Million Weekend, which became a New York Times bestseller. And the most interesting part is where he talks about how he evaluates his startup ideas. And the basic gist of it is he will have an idea and first he will check if there is demand for it in these really interesting ways. So like checking Google Trends and Facebook ads. He describes all of it in this blog post he wrote for Tim Ferriss. I recommend you read it. It is a decade old, but it's still interesting to read to see how systematic he is in evaluating. Now, I have to give you one word of warning, which is I have tried this path many, many times. If you go on my website, there's a section where I track every single product I launch and whether it was successful or not. And you'll see around like 2024 and early 2025, this enormous pile of failures. And this is all when I was consuming all this content about spotting trends and building on top of them. Like I noticed that AI hypnosis was suddenly growing. So I built an AI hypnosis app, and I noticed that AI personalized resumes were also a growing trend. So I built one, even though I've never had a resume in my whole life. And unsurprisingly, all of them failed. And if I look at the 3 products that worked for me, they were organic ideas, things that I use myself. This doesn't mean that the path is wrong either. Again, it worked for Jeff Bezos. But here's how I think about it, right? So if we're like characters in a video game and we all have our stats, so like if you're a healer, you probably should not be the one charging into battle. I kind of see life like that, where you should try a little bit of everything and see what works for your character. Like, where do your strengths lie? Clearly, Bezos has a lot of points in things like spotting a trend and riding a wave, but I don't. I found out that the stat that most matters to my character is building something that I actually use. So that brings us to the most common path for the majority of startup founders, building something you actually want and use. In fact, I believe the most famous piece of startup advice ever written is this one. Again, the program essay, where he says, the way to get startup ideas is not to try to think of startup ideas. It's to look for problems, preferably problems you have yourself. Funnily enough, I had read that sentence and sentences like it thousands of times before, and it never really stuck until I worked for this guy. And if you don't know Kevin Rose, you should. He created Dig, which was basically Reddit before Reddit. And by the way, he recently bought Dig back and relaunched it. It's now this really cool like AI news site. It's really cool if you want to follow what's going on in the X.com AI conversation, but you don't want to scroll X all day. It just takes all the tweets and summarizes everything here. I recommend it. And nowadays, Kevin is mostly an investor, but he does this thing on the side that I really love, which is he always builds these super cool, super niche apps that people deeply, deeply love. And here are the examples. So he built Zero, which is the most popular fasting app in the world. I didn't even know you could build a fasting app. He also built this meditation app, Oak. It was my favorite meditation app until he sold it because of how beautiful and simple it was. And he also built this app, which was for watch collectors. So, fasting, meditation, watches, It could not be more random, and yet every single one of these apps worked inside its niche. So earlier this year, around January, I reached out to Kevin and I said I wanted to work with him so I could learn how does he do it. And thankfully he accepted. I worked with him for a few months and I got to ask him the 1,000 questions that I've had over the years, which was awesome. And I learned a ton of stuff that I'm now applying. In fact, this YouTube channel and course that I've started came from these conversations that I had with Kevin. But from all our conversations, if I had to distill the principle that stuck with me the most, it would be this. He said, build something you yourself use, ideally every day. By the way, ideally every day is a super high bar, but he's right. And when you look at the apps he built, they seem random, but they were all his own interest and he used every single one. And like I said, my own track record proves that. When I looked at the apps that I built that worked the best, they were all apps that I myself either used once upon a time or I still use today. This all brings us to the star of this lecture, Mark Pincus. We'll meet him properly in a minute, but just to finish this point on organic startup ideas, Mark calls this the focus group of one, which is something I love. Before you ask a single stranger what they think about your idea, there's only one user you should study with complete honesty, and that's you. So then you could ask yourself, this brutally simple question, which is forget about getting a bunch of users, looking at your analytics, etc. Before any of that, ask yourself this: did you use your own product this week? And by the way, you have to be honest, right? You should not force yourself to use your own product. Did you really need it and want to use it? Because if even you don't return, why would a stranger? In fact, in one of his essays, Paul Graham asks YC founders the same question. He'll say something like, would you use this thing yourself if you hadn't created it? And he says that you'd be surprised how often the answer is no. And funny enough, these two worlds collided a month ago when Mark Pincus did this interview on the YC podcast, where Gary Tan says at YC they give away these t-shirts that say, make something people want. And Mark Pincus replies, make something you want to start with. So a couple of months ago, Mark Pincus was on Lenny's podcast, and Lenny introduced Mark as someone who, quote, arguably created more hit consumer products than anyone in history. And it sounded like a dubious claim, but I looked into it and it holds up. So in Zynga alone, out of the 10 or so products they launched, 8 became hits and 2 became massive hits. Some of them are still around today, like Words with Friends. And you'd say, well, this is in Zynga, like big companies launch hits, but this ignores the successes that Mark had before Zynga. One company sold for $38 million in 2000, and the other went public. And he attributes a lot of that success to this framework, proven, better, new. And I first heard about it around a year ago when Mark went on the Arthi Entry Run podcast. And apparently it was something that every PM in Silicon Valley already knew. So I was very jealous of both Arthi and Entry Run because they knew exactly what Mark was talking about. And I tried finding more about it, but there was some information online, but it never went into a lot of detail. Luckily for us, he recently published this book, Life at the Speed of Play. It's awesome. I highly recommend it. And in it, he goes deep into proven, better, new. In fact, if you subscribe to the newsletter, he gives you the entire chapter for free, which is bananas, but hint, hint. This is the framework. It has 3 parts, obviously proven, better, and new. So let's go into each of them. The first part is proven, which is basically, first you have to find a product that your target audience, if you combine this with what I talked about before, you are the target audience. So find a product that you use. And then the first step Mark would tell you would be to copy it legally, but without apology. So copy the features, the mechanics, the conventions that everyone in this category is already used to. The idea here is for you not to spend any energy reinventing what already works. And Mark is strict about how deeply you have to study this. He basically says that you have not earned the right to innovate on top of a product until you're like the world's leading PhD on the product that already exists. Now, I know what you might say, copying feels gross. I feel it too. For one, I hate when people copy my ideas. I still have not made peace with it. But also, you maybe have this feeling too where you can look at 1,000 products throughout the day and you can tell yourself, I could do this better if I just tweak these little things. And many times you are right. In fact, if you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend this short documentary by Kirby Ferguson called Everything is a Remix. If you want even more on this topic, I recommend this book by Austin Kleon. I hope I'm saying that right. In fact, I've been thinking about this since 2018, where I watched this lecture by Demis Hassabis, who is the founder of DeepMind. And in this part of the lecture, he describes the idea of creativity because of the whole topic of whether AI is creative or not. Where does creativity come from? And he gives these 3 different types of creativity. So just so you can hang these ideas onto something, let's think of a problem. Let's think about getting from point A to point B. And you want to solve that problem. So you're going to use these 3 different levels of creativity to do it. So for you to go from point A to point B, you're going to look at how other people did it. And that's the data, right? Is these green dots. So let's say most people solve this problem by riding a horse, right? So from point A to point B, they ride a horse. So if you're using interpolation, you're just using an average of the data. So you say most people are solving the problem by riding a horse. I'm just going to solve the problem by also riding an average horse. Then extrapolation would be where you extend the boundaries of the data. So you say most people solve the problem by riding a horse. I'm going to ride a faster horse, the fastest horse. You're extending the boundaries of the data. And then there's invention, which is thinking completely outside the box, which is most people solve the problem by riding a horse. I'm going to ride a car. But even in this lecture, Demis Hassabis talks about invention as being, quote, perhaps informed in some way by the data. And that's my point, right? So even if something looks super innovative and invented, I believe that it always comes from parts that already existed. If we go back to the example of the car, it looks super innovative and completely different from a horse. But if you look at images of the first car, and this was Carl Benz's 1886 machine, basically you're going to see a carriage. In fact, back then, a car was not a car, it was called a horseless carriage. And the language still gives that away today, right? So we measure engines in horsepower. So, you think that a horse is completely different from a car, but my belief is over centuries and tiny, tiny steps, the horse was just a way to solve a problem, and little by little, that way has evolved into what we now know as the car. And whatever example I can think of works that way, right? So we would think that the iPhone, which is the most successful consumer product of all time, was something completely innovative. But even when Steve Jobs introduced it on stage, he would always refer to it as an iPod, a phone, and a breakthrough internet communicator. And unsurprisingly, Steve Jobs put this a lot more eloquently than I could. When he said creativity is just connecting things. When you ask creative people how they did something, they feel a little guilty because they didn't really do it. They just saw something. It seemed obvious to them after a while. That's because they were able to connect experiences they've had and synthesize new things. Anyways, this is my TED Talk to say that you could easily make a case that there's nothing new under the sun and everything is copied and remixed. And I agree with 2 caveats, a moral one and a legal one. So I think that copying is not the same as stealing, which would be completely copying someone's idea and not adding anything new on top of it. And I think that is wrong and pointless because you haven't brought any real value. And then there's the legal caveat, which is why Mark Pincus always says copying legally when he describes proven. because he's been sued a few times for this. But just to warn you, like an idea, a feature, a mechanic, it's generally fair game, but you cannot steal someone's code, their data, their designs, or their content. Anyways, the next step in the Proven Better New framework is better. This one I love because it's very simple. It's basically just adding one objective improvement to the proven experience. Mark Pincus would describe better as something that 10 out of 10 of the existing users of that product would say, fuck yeah. It cannot be something that you think might be better. It has to be something that no one would disagree with you. I love better because it's concrete. Your product is free instead of charging, $60 or half the price, or you don't have to download it. All of these are better objectively for everyone. And then there's new, which I do not love because it's hard, but this is your innovation zone. It's also a lot of the times the reason why people would try the product. And when people describe it to friends, they will usually lead with the new and the most likely part to fail. So Mark Pincus would tell you to isolate new, test it on its own, and have another 3 new ideas behind it ready to go for when this one probably fails. In fact, at Zynga, he had this maxim, which was assume all your news are going to fail until one finally doesn't. And the easiest example of this comes from Mark's product, Zynga Poker. If you're not familiar with Zynga Poker, which I wasn't, it was basically this, where you're playing poker on Facebook with your friends. So like you can see their profile pictures here. And it's a good demonstration of Proven Better New because the proven part is he didn't redesign poker, right? So it was the same table, the same rules, everything the same as poker. The better part was it was not a game you had to download. You could just press play and you would play instantly on Facebook. And the new part was you could actually see real people that you were playing with. You could see their profile pictures. It was on Facebook. This was all new at the time. And in his book, Mark gives these 2 caveats to Proven Better New. The first one is that sometimes there is no new, thankfully for me. He argues that Slack was just using Proven because apparently they just built this app, HipChat, and they made it much friendlier and more fun. We're going to talk a lot more about Slack in the future. And that was their better. So HipChat, but friendlier and fun. And secondly, if there's a new platform, the platform itself becomes your new. So you don't have to think of a new. He talks about this product, Heyday, which apparently used Mark's Farmville as the proven and simply built it as a mobile game, which was the new. And Heyday became very successful. And that's why here I say you can just take something that works on one platform, move it to another platform, and that's your new. By the way, this is a little self-serving point, but I love this quote from Mark's book. He says, "It wasn't that we were good at virality. Our core metric was retention, not virality. We grew, we outlasted everybody because we had the best retention. I think we were the only consumer company in the world that tracked day 365 retention." And that's bananas, let me just say, because day 365 retention means that a year later, people are still using your product. And that is such rarefied air. The top companies in the world, like Google and Amazon, they have around 80% day 365 retention. And then these still giant companies like LinkedIn have something like 30%. So, if you build a product that is in that rarefied air, you'll build one of the biggest companies in the world. And that is the claim that I made way back 2 weeks ago in lecture 1. But now we've come full circle, right? So you've heard it from me, but you've also heard it from the person who's built the highest number of successful consumer products of all time. And now we've reached the end of the lecture. But one final note. Now you can see how risky the series is for me. When I committed to this idea of applying retention principles in public to these 2 products, I was quietly making a bet that both these ideas are good. And this lecture is where that bet gets called. Because if either of these ideas are an idea that people don't fundamentally want, then everything that Andrew Chen said at the beginning of the lecture will apply to me, And the next 49 lectures of tactics that we'll talk about will not bend that curve. So I know this is why I keep encouraging you to send me your product so I can help you with your retention. If my projects fail, I can always point at your project and say, hey, the retention principles and lessons work. It's just that my ideas suck. So here is your homework for this week. Write a proven better new brief for your product. This can be simple, so it's just one line for proven, one for better, one for new. And then write an honest answer to the focus group of one question. I did it for both of my products. And even though I already knew the framework and I had kind of used it, that's why this course is useful, because I get to really implement it. For Mental Math Pro, the proven is that people already buy books and courses on improving their mental math. And the better is that a book can teach you the methods, but it doesn't let you practice as much as you need to really learn, but the website does. Plus, I did a one-time price, which is the same as a book. And as for new, I haven't really isolated one yet. I told you that new was the hardest one for me. And then for the focus group of one question, did I use it in the last week? Yes and no. So I built this for myself. And when I built it, I used it every day for a couple of weeks, maybe a month. And then once I reached the score that I wanted, I just stopped. And this checks out. So the people who have used Mental Math Pro really love it. But I believe that doing this focus group of one question really spotted the problem. And it's related to something we talked about earlier in the lecture. Can you guess what it is? Basically, books and courses are a one-time product. You read them, you practice, you're done. And the problem with that is really clear when you see this quote by Andrew Chen, which is, if you want a high retention product, you need to pick a category that is high retention already. And the category I picked to build a better product on top of is not a high retention category. And that explains the terrible Mental Math Pro retention, which means that the solution, again, Andrew Chen, is to pivot. And the idea that's currently floating in my head would be to create something like chess.com, but for math, where you still learn the techniques and the course stays, but you still have this like daily, maybe weekly competition against other people. Or maybe something like Wordle, where you have a daily problem to solve. Chess.com has the puzzles. But anyways, that's only an idea for now. We'll look more into it in a later lecture. And then I did proven better new for BetterLink. The proven is that these geo-localized affiliate links are a popular category amongst Amazon affiliate websites. In fact, the proven in this category is this Amazon product, one link, which is quite terrible. But then the better in BetterLink is that the price begins at $3 per month. The closest paid alternative is twice as much as that. This is one of those things that 10 out of 10 people would agree on that is better. As for new, once again, I don't have any new angle on this yet. Now, in Mental Math Pro, I think a new would be necessary. In BetterLink, however, I don't really see a need for a new. Maybe this is more like Slack, where proven plus better is the whole product. And for the focus group of one question, that is a definite yes. And that is actually BetterLink's strongest card. It started as a script that I wrote for my own site. And at first it was pretty terrible. Only after a year using it myself and on my own website did I decide to turn it into a product. And I still use it every day. I check it pretty much all the time. And it works and it pays me more money. So I love it. Anyways, like I said, this is what I recommend you do. You can print this out or create your own. But you know the drill by now. So watching this is the small brain thing. Applying it is the galaxy brain. Do your own proven better new exercise, right? So proven is name the existing product or products that you/your users are already using. By the way, if you cannot name a single product, that is not a small finding. And better is naming one improvement that 10 out of 10 people would agree on. And then new is your one novel idea. And make sure that it's so simple that you can test it and quickly get rid of it if it doesn't work. And then you answer the focus group of one question. Did you use your own product this week? Without forcing yourself. It's a simple yes or no answer. And as you saw, mine is shaky as well, so no judgment. And that is it for probably what's the longest lecture so far. maybe even the longest lecture in the series because it's such an important topic. Next week, we'll look at what happens once you have the idea, you've used Proven Better New, you've built it for yourself, you love it, you use it every day. What comes next? Anyways, that is 3 lectures down, 49 to go. I hope to see you there, and I hope you have the absolute best day.